everyone, and welcome to our second webinar with the Women Grow Ohio and Rural Action here at the Appalachian Center for Economic Networks in Athens, Ohio. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to enter them into your chat box, and we will get to them hopefully at the end of the webinar. Thanks.
I'm Carrie Starr, and today we're here with Annie Warmke, veteran goat farmer.
Some days it feels like a real veteran.
So please share some stories with us from the trenches.
Okay.
How long have you been raising dairy goats?
Not long enough, I think. So.
and how did you get started?
Well, I've been at this actually when I was a kid in high school. My dad won a dairy goat in a poker game, if you can believe that. My dad, who was the choir director at the church, and that was my first experience with dairy goats, which taught me a lot because I had no idea what was supposed to happen. And she was a Nubian, and she was very, very pregnant and was super cold out, and I was really concerned about her. We did have a little barn, but it wasn't set up to have anything in it. And so my dad said, she'll be all right, she knows what to do. And so that night she had twins, and the next morning they were frozen to death.
Oh, no.
And so to this day, when I'm working with animals or even people, and somebody says, it'll be all right, they know what to do, I'm like, no, now I have to go back and make sure I got it right. So that was my first experience with goats. And then I was a city woman for quite a long time. And then about 14 years ago, I got back into keeping goats. My first goat, Eleanor Rigby, a Saanen milk goat, and she was made of silly putty, thank goodness, because she just kept bouncing back no matter what stupid things I did. And so one of the reasons that I really enjoy talking about goats is because I feel like a lot of people get into the goat business, and maybe not even a business, just having goats without really preparing. Yes. And so it makes it a miserable experience for both the human and the goats. And it could be so great because I really, really enjoy goats. I love the psychology of goats. And I feel like everybody should be thrilled to death to be a goat herder. And so I'm like the Johnny Appleseed of goat herding, and then I want to talk about how we can get this right from the beginning.
Well, it's always good to get off on a good foot.
So one thing I wanted to say, which may or may not be an issue, but anybody that's on the webinar, is that if you would turn your phone to mute if they're listening on a mobile phone, because sometimes there can be like some kind of feedback or something. I'm not sure, but that's what they always tell me when we do webinars, is you should turn your phone to mute.
Okay. So as you mentioned, goats can be a very pleasant experience. So how can we improve our herd's welfare, and how can we do what's right for our goats?
Well, first of all, we got to start out with some pretty basic tenets, which apply to children that are human children, and they apply to pretty much any animal situation, any livestock. But we need to have some awareness of the kinds of food that goats really need to have in order to do their job. And so they've got a couple of jobs. One is that they may produce kids and milk, so that's a different set of nutrients and a different set of food. And or maybe they're just going to eat brush and eat brambles and help you with the weeds, and that's a different set of nutrition and feed. And then of course what we want to do is to end up with a really healthy animal because of that feed, and we also want to have a good poop because we want to have that poop. It's so evenly balanced in terms of using it for garden and compost and stuff. So we want to have a good product at every turn. So first of all, food, and then the environment. How is that environment designed for the goat specifically? Because you can raise a goat anywhere, but if you want to have a healthy goat, you need to have a situation where the goat has the right housing, and we'll talk about that later. Also, the manager, the goat herder, or the person responsible needs to have a certain basic knowledge in order for that animal to do its job. And if I don't have the best knowledge that I can with that animal, then I'm not gonna help that animal do his or her job. And then skilled, knowledgeable, and conscientious animal care, that has to do with how we take care of an animal if it's injured or has some kind of illness or parasite issue. And then also, how do we transport that animal? So we're gonna buy an animal or we're gonna take an animal away. And then what do we do with that animal once we have decided that it's either gonna be meat or maybe there's a problem and we're sending it away, or how are we gonna deal with it when it dies on our farm? So these are all things from the beginning of life to the end of their life that we have to think about and have a plan for if we want to get it right.
So tell us what's normal in the goat world. How can we tell when our goats are normal?
That's it.
Of course, chaos is kind of normal in the goat world.
Yeah, well, so what's normal in the goat world? Well, nothing, actually, nothing. It's kind of like, what's normal in your family? So,
Yeah.
well, first of all, I think it's quite valuable to recognize that goats are a prey animal. And that means that their DNA, everything in them knows to protect themselves because something is hunting them. And that's pretty valuable in terms of interacting and also in how you teach them to do what you want them to do. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Stress, so they're highly easily stressed. And that's because they're on hyper alert because they know at any turn something's going to come and get them. And one of the things that we want to think about in terms of stress is that if they live as a herd, so a lot of people want to have one goat, and that's just cruel and inhumane. They need to have at least one other animal that they can link up with that helps them to be less stressed and to feel more protected. Also, normally there is a queen. That's the wisest goat, although I would debate that sometimes. The wisest goat in the herd, and she does decide that. And the others have to go along, so there might be a big rumble and lots of fighting. But she knows she's going to be the queen. And then also, it's totally normal, and if it doesn't happen this way, you might wonder what's going on, is that they gather together while they're ruminating, and that means after they've eaten and that food is in that first rumen or stomach, they're all going to go and kind of lay around or hang out while they kind of, as they say, chew the cud. So these are all real common traits. If you just really pay attention and you watch your herd, you'll see who's in charge, who's at the lowest end of the herd, whatever. So goats are foragers, which is very different than how we've been taught to believe their behavior. And by forager, I mean they eat a little of this and a little of that, and they really would prefer to be in the woods or along a fence row where there's lots of wild morning glory and honeysuckle and lots of raspberry canes and blackberry canes. And those things contain amazing amounts of copper and selenium, which the ground tends to be, the soil and pastures tend to be low on. So if they have access to a lot of that, that's going to help them to maintain balance. They'll eat grass, but they are foragers by nature, and if we want them to be healthy, we need to understand that. They need a mixture of plants, so just like humans, they need a variety of different kinds of plants because different kinds of plants produce different nutrients, and they need to be able to rotate pastures so that first of all, the pasture stays healthy when it's a certain height and not to let it get below that. And then also because the parasites tend to be at the bottom of the stem of the plant, like a grass plant. Right. The parasites are not on brambles and morning glory. They're on grasses.
Right.
So we don't want them to eat too low. And if we keep rotating them around, then we disrupt the parasite table in the process, and we also help the pasture plants. And then when they go to eat in the pasture or in the forest, they tend to spread themselves out. And that's totally normal. The mama will call the babies, get over here kind of thing, but everybody else will be in their own place, so they're not all eating in the same place. And they also will not consume dirty food or water. They will as a last resort, but they absolutely are very sure about what's clean and what isn't. We need lots of people in the world to figure that one out. Goats are pretty good at it. They use their sense of smell, so they're really smart about that, and that's why they often know the food's dirty or the water's dirty, so it's very keen sense of smell. And it's common that the dam, which is the mom, once she's had kids, she's called a dam. Her kids are gonna sleep with her, and maybe she'll have several generations of kids that will sleep with her, and their kids will sleep. So they all sleep it's a clique, really, and they have their own cliques within the herd. Animal interaction with the kids is really amazing. They have different sounds that they use to order the kids around. Some moms are bossier than others. They also will pinch their ear or pull their tail or give them a little, you didn't listen to me kind of thing. And so they have a lot of really good interaction. The picture here is one of my favorites because this is Eleanor Rigby with her last kid, whose name was Ellen. And it's just so precious because they really have this kind of loving interaction with their kids. Their skin is really very sensitive, even though it is covered with hair. And that's why things like massage and just brushing them and everything, they have a real keen sense about that. And their nose, mouth, lips, ears, and foot pads are also very sensitive. And so it's important to understand how that works for them. They use their lips to grab a hold of food and things, and they'll know if that's good or not, just because they have those sensitivities. Their ears, sometimes when they're misbehaving and not listening to me, I don't hurt them, but I'll take a hold of their ear and they're immediately paying attention, like, oh, I wasn't listening, but I am now.
You pull the mama goat rank.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I am the head of the herd. I don't want to be, and I often don't take that role, but if it's needed, I will. And they know it too, so that's important as well.
So you often tell me that you use your psychology degree dealing with your goats. So tell me about herd psychology.
Well, I will say that my degree is not in psychology because I would have gotten kicked out of school, but it's in counseling. That's very different, although there is a lot of psychology in that. And one of the things that I really enjoy about goats and herding, and also any kind of thing like chickens and as a flock, and pigs, what do they call pigs that are together?
What's a herd?
It's called a herd. Okay, I forgot that. So anything like that is how that community works together, because as a goat manager or as a goat herder, if I can understand how those goats work with each other, that's going to make my job a lot easier, because I'm going to understand that the queen is Pinky. And so if I know that Pinky is going to get led with me, everybody's going to follow. She's going to get fed first because I'm honoring, or she's going to get milked first, and then everybody else is going to acquiesce to her. So I'm just continuing to be a part of the herd and understand how they operate. So there are some really fascinating studies that are being done in Australia right now about the psychology of goats. And one of the things that they've studied is that they now know that goats know who they like. And I've said this for a long time, because oftentimes people will come into the barnyard and the queen will come and she will rub them. And I'll say, oh, she's accepting you into the herd. And I'm sure people thought I was being goofy, but now I have proof, because psychologists have studied this and said I'm absolutely right. And it's pretty cool because they know the goats in the herd that they like. And so those are the ones that they hang with. So for example, Pinky is the head of the herd right now, but everybody's always liked her. And they've always come in and kind of hung with her, and the kids when they're little, even though they're not her kids. And her mom was like that. Her mom's Eleanor Rigby, who was my very first goat. So they know who they like and they know who they don't like, and they can be very grumpy with people and goats that they don't like. So we don't tolerate that with humans. My goal with my goats is to be able to put my face in the face of that goat and know that nothing bad is going to happen. And I had one time where I had rescued some goats. They were really good looking goats, but they had never been allowed to have real human contact, and they had no idea how to interact even really with each other. And they were a mother and her two doelings. And so when they came, it was clear that they thought they were gonna boss me. And so we didn't quite get that straightened out before some of our interns came to my farm, Blue Rock Station, and they had spent a lot of time with my goat herd, so they know everybody's, as I call, into pedigree, not pedigree, and so you can put your face in their face and you tell them to do something and they really do understand you. And so, so they went to see the 3 new goats. And when they did, the mama decided she didn't like the young woman that was there, and she went after her and she pinned her against the wall. I've never had this happen before. And of course, the intern is screaming bloody murder. I knew right away something horrible was happening, and I think she could have killed her, actually.
Oh, my word.
She had a big rack of horns. So the next day, nobody was there but me, and the goat came out and she pushed me. She pushed me fairly hard, but it was more like seeing what she was going to get away with. And she hadn't done this. And so when I turned around, she was waiting and she pushed me really hard. So I took my fist. I'm not a person who hits as a solution, but I took my fist and I hit her as hard as I could in the head. Well, there's no way I could have hurt her, but I hurt her pride.
Right.
And she put her head down like she was bowing to me, and she never did that to me again. So, but I never trusted her after that.
Right.
So all of my goats, really, every day I put my face in their face to say, how are you doing this morning? Or, oh, you're so beautiful today, or something, because I want to prove to myself every day they're going to do that with me. So they also can learn patterns. So this is one of the things they discovered in the study. And so they understand patterns. So for example, they can learn their names. And so we start teaching names right off from the day they're born. We call their name constantly. We'll say, oh, Alex, you're such a good boy. Alex, come here. It's like you get sick of hearing it. But after about 2 weeks, when you say, Alex, come here, they do. And even though they're little kids, you know, human little kids don't mind that well. So anyway, so it's pretty cool. But they understand the pattern of, so this thing happens here at this time of day. So everybody's going to be there for me. And this is how it's going to work. And so many of the goats will actually go and stand where they're going to get tied up, because some of them don't, but most of them will do that. And once they see I want them to go to the same location each time to be tied up for milking or for feed, or just to behave, they'll do it. So they do understand patterns. Again, the female is the leader, so if I'm letting her, I'm asking her to be the lead and follow the pattern, they're going to follow the pattern with her for the most part. And critical mass work, so let's say you have a dozen goats, and 6 of them go, the others are going to go because they just, the magnetic force of goat world is pulling them. So they're always going to challenge the newcomer goats, just like they do newcomer humans in their herd. And they can do that in a number of ways, but usually it can be harsh. So if I have new goats, I don't, first of all, bring them right into the herd. They have an incubation period to stay out for about 2 weeks to make sure they're all healthy and everything's cool. And they're in a place where they can see the other herd and the herd can see them. So they understand there are other goats, they call to each other, they argue with each other, but they cannot get to each other. And then the day that I expect to bring them into the herd, I don't go anywhere. I stay. Maybe I'm cleaning something, or maybe I'm just sitting there being with them. And usually then it's all sorted out pretty quickly, because that new goat's gonna go to the bottom of the herd. Or in the pecking order, they'll be somewhere above maybe the new kids, but not up into the main part of the herd with any adults. So last year I had a goat named Fiona, and she was getting bossier and bossier each season after she kidded. And she's a beautiful goat, and I loved her to bits, and very good with me, but she was getting more and more harsh with the others, like headbutting at the gate. I want to go first. And she wanted to be the head of the herd, but she didn't want to take the responsibility, kind of like in real life,
Uh-huh.
kind of like some of our leaders. So, so what happened then was when she kidded, she was kind of off to herself, because they will go off to themselves to kid,
Mhm.
and that just makes sense. And so it's super cold, so she was actually in a warmer place. And she could still see them, they could still see her. That's really important to understand that concept, so they don't feel isolated. And so when she came back to the herd, she was gonna resume, I'm in charge of you, but I'm not taking any responsibility. And all of the adult goats, which are all does,
Mhm.
lined up and had a fight.
Oh, goodness.
And this had happened before, but not like this. And it went on for almost 60 minutes.
Oh, my gosh.
And so Pinky, who wanted to be the head of the herd, was fighting, but then the other big girls were behind her, and they would all just rub all over Fiona and push her, and she's fighting, fighting, fighting. Well, at some point, you could see her decide, I'm going to use a different tack, because she's quite intelligent.
Mhm.
I'm going to pretend that everything's cool, and I'm not going to try to take over. And so she decided she's going to leave the barnyard. They all just followed her. She went up on the big rock pile, they followed her. She came back to the barnyard, they followed her. And then she started to run and make these different zigzags, and up on the rock pile, they just kept following her because they didn't believe her.
Uh-huh.
This went on for an hour. Everybody had a bloody head, not bad, but you know, they had really hit each other hard. This went on 2 different times over
Wow.
2 days. And then finally Fiona gave up. So it's super important to support what's going on in the herd.
Mhm.
Like, for example, when they all started fighting, I gathered up all the kids, anybody that wasn't in the fray, because occasionally a goat that's almost adult will think, I think, you know, that's my mom. I think I'll go over there and see if I can put my 2 cents in. And I don't really want anybody to get hurt.
Right.
So I'm just trying to do my job and keep everybody safe. So they posture for a higher place from time to time within the herd, and also just standing up on something. You might have a block that's 2 inches high, and everybody will argue over who stands on that block because they're up above, off the ground somehow. So, yeah. So they can easily learn their name, and I talked about that. We just repeat it over and over. We give dignified names every year. In December, we have a meeting, and everybody comes and looks at baby name books. And we name all of the kids after using the first letter of the mom,
Mhm.
and that works pretty well. And then we don't have, you know, like tons of goats. My herd's at 13 right now, and so I might have as many as 25 after kidding season.
Mhm.
But so everybody learns their names, and they're all really dignified names. Although I might question Pinky. Her real name is Estra, but she was so white we. Pinky in the brain, you know.
Oh, yeah.
She is Pinky though. She's adorable. So they vocalize, and they have a lot of different sounds they vocalize with.
Mhm.
They have you know a certain call they make when they're in pain. They have some death sounds they make when they're going to die. They have lots of verbalization with their kids and also with each other.
Mhm.
So it's important to listen to them and understand, because you might be somewhere else and you hear a certain sound and it tells you better get over there really quickly, or nothing's wrong, they're just arguing or whatever that is. They naturally move to larger open spaces. They don't like tight spaces. So I know every day when I ask my goat to go into the milk room through the door, it's darker inside than it is outside if I don't have the light on, and she will hesitate.
Mhm.
Because she's not sure, is there something going to hurt me in there because it's tight, and it's not a small room, but it's darker. And so it's important to understand why they hesitate or why they're eager, so you can use those situations to either hold them back or motivate them. They do startle easily, and there are lots of stories about goats that have been startled by a really vicious dog or a loud boom of some kind and just fall over dead.
Wow.
So it's important to understand that. And as I said, they'd like to move toward light, not dark, and they don't like uneven lighting. They also have really good long-term memory, so you can teach them something and they will remember it, but also remember in that learning curve, if it's a bad thing, they're gonna remember that too.
So what basics do goats need? What do you absolutely have to have? If you want to have goats come to your farm, what's the bare minimum that you absolutely have to have?
Well, you've got to have some kind of physical structure that protects them from the weather. They don't like wind, they don't like rain, they don't like snow, and these are all things that really can make them quite sick or even die. They can get pneumonia fairly easily. They also need to have, so I'm just amazed on Facebook. I try not to look at most of the posts on Facebook from a lot of these different goat pages, because the things they'll say, do you think my goats will be okay? It's 10 below and they're out in the field and I don't have any place for them to be. I'm not exaggerating.
No, I've seen those pages.
It just makes me really feel sad for that farmer, because first of all, they're not going to get the most they can out of that herd by treating them that way, and also the herd is suffering. So they need to have good housing, and it doesn't have to be a great thing. It could be a garden building so that they have enough room to get in and they're protected in some way. But also think about things like different features that would be in those buildings, like electrical. So they shouldn't have any ability to get in contact with electrical, because they like to chew on things. And also they can get bruised easily or stabbed. I had a goat, the first goat I had, she had 2 kids, and we were moving some things, and one of the babies fell in between what we were moving, because we had set it down to leave, and the wall, and it bruised its leg. But what happens in an animal like a horse or a goat, where the leg is very thin, the muscle is not, very heavy there.
Yeah.
If you touch the bruise, it will open. It just split open.
Oh my.
So that was pretty wigging me out kind of thing that happened. I wasn't there when it happened, and my husband said when I got home, I think your goat needs some of your nursing. And I went out, he said, I poured some alcohol on it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, no, he didn't tell me it had burst open. He said, it's hurt, and I poured some alcohol on the wound. So when I went up, and the leg from the knee to the ankle was split open, I could see the bone. And I said, oh my God, it's a wonder she didn't die, because it must have hurt like crazy. But then I started reading about it later, and I realized that maybe when he put the alcohol on it, it caused it to open even further. So I just poured a lot of acidophilus, which is a probiotic, on it, and finally found a vet, an old Doc Richmond down in McConnellsville, and he said, all right, you bring her and I'll help you. And when he saw the acidophilus, he's like, oh, what happened? You are the strangest woman, he said. What happened? It's already got something wrong with his leg. And I said, no, that's the powder from the probiotic. And he said, oh, that's so weird. But he sewed it up for me, and that was pretty amazing, because when I went to take the stitches out, the whole wound where the stitches were fell off in my hand. I've never had that happen. The acidophilus had regenerated the skin underneath of it, and she never had a scar or anything.
Wow.
So I told Doc Richmond once when I saw him at the grocery, he goes, I don't know, you've got some kind of magic juju or something. I don't know what that is. So anyway, so another thing to consider is if you've got a lot of stuff laying around, and lots of farms do, or lots of people do in general, if they're keeping an animal, so toxic fumes and substances, it's easy to poison anything just from the breathing of it, or their skin can absorb it, and so can the humans. And also they need to have a solidly constructed area to lie down. And that is based on a formula set up by different humane groups, and it says that they should have a space for each adult 1.5 times their body, like their footprint of their body, and I don't mean their feet, but what their body would take up when it lays down. And so they've got to have that much space. And yeah, a lot of times they're going to lay with their own family, with their own kids or whatever. And they need to have adequate bedding as well, so that they're not on the ground when it's cold. It just makes a big difference, and it needs to be clean. So we use what we call deep bedding, and some people dispute that for goats. But deep bedding is, I think, really great, because what that means is the animal's going to poop and pee, And pee is a great thing for creating heat in compost. And then there's hay, because goats waste about 1/3 of every bale of hay. And so that all gets worked around and spread around by them and the chickens that are in there digging and stuff maybe during the day. And that begins to generate a warmth in the wintertime. So, and then it just keeps added to and added to and added to. So it creates a heated mattress underneath of them when they need more warmth. Also, not just to have space for the goat to lie down, but to have space for the goat to lie in a normal resting position and then have the availability to lie with the goats they want to be there. Also, they need the same thing for outdoors. So it's not a matter of, oh, because a lot of people on the Facebook pages, if you really looked at them very much, it seems like a lot of people have goats in their house, which is incredibly cruel for the goat. That goat needs to know how to be a goat. Goats live a long time. If you treat them well and you're able to, argue against the parasite load and accidents, they might live to be 15 or more. And so how long are you going to keep that goat in that situation? They put diapers on the goat. And I can see the reasoning for that if it's injured or they feel like they need to bring it in the house for some reason, but it's really unfair and inhumane, I believe. And so people can dispute me on that and we can talk about that. But they need to be in a natural environment as much as possible to be healthy. And that includes being outside, being able to eat the things they normally eat and experience life in the wide open spaces with lots of sunshine and each other.
We all need that.
We do. So I said in the beginning, it's really how do we raise our kids? Well, lots of people aren't doing too well at that either. So maybe they need to have this webinar.
Yeah, it applies to kids of all.
That's right, of all kinds. So they need winter shelter as well as summer shelter, which would be maybe two different things. So winter shelter is going to protect them from the wind and the rain and the snow, and maybe have some deep bedding. And they also then in the summer need to have some cross ventilation and a cooler, shadier space where they can be in the shade every time they need to be. So we've listed here the minimum bedded space, and again, this is based on a couple of different websites that we'll talk about at the end about humane treatment of animals. And so adult does need 18 square feet. And bucks need 30 to 40 square feet. They are bigger, but they also, the bull in the china shop thing, they just like to think they're the boss, but in the herd, they're nobody. So, and they're always fighting to say, I am somebody. And the only time they get that reinforced is when the doe's in heat. And when she's in heat, he is Antonio Banderas. And the minute she's not, he is the scum of the earth. So think about that.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother webinar. Anyway, so then kids need 8 to 10 square feet, depending on, their size, because I've had kids that are really big and they would have needed more, and some that are pretty tiny, but this is on average. And this is a good rule to follow. And you can see in the picture, these are brother and sister here, and they're not taking up very much space, but they're probably a day old. And they're gonna sleep like that a lot of their life together, but they're gonna get a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So, and they look so cute there. So bucks need to be housed with other goats, or at least within sight and sound of the herd. And I really believe I always have at least one wether, which is a goat that's been castrated. And he doesn't like that. He wants to be with his mom and everybody else in the herd, but he has to go and be with the buck during the time that the bucks are not allowed to be with the females. And does come into heat about every 21 days, give or take a few hours, and they'll be in heat between 24 and 48 hours. And that buck is quite resourceful. There are goats that have gotten pregnant through the fence. I'll leave you to use your imagination on that one. And there's no holding them back, because nature says, I got one chance to be important, and I'm going to take it. So
time to shine.
That's right. My one, Francois, I don't sometimes even know how he got in to the fence. I don't know. It's like he grew some kind of wings and flew over the fence, because the rest of the year he doesn't come. He didn't get through that fence, but that one time, which was very bad, He was so happy in the morning. He had been, as they say, servicing several goats during the night, and we had no idea what was going on or anything, and he was just proud as he could be.
Look what I did.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
I'm Francois, what do you say? Oh la la. So the other thing, just to mention real quickly about electric fences, I just want to say something about that. There are a couple of issues around electric fences. First of all, if we're going to use electric fencing in some way, we do what we call kindergarten. We do this with pigs, we do it with goats. And we create in a situation where the electric is in a really small area, like the size of a living room. And it's got a lot of good greens and, so they've got plenty to eat there. And we show them what the fence does, and then we stay with them. Because a lot of these, like premier fencing, there were a webbed fencing, a net fencing, and a goat can get their horns caught in that and die because it is an intermittent shock, but it's enough to kill them. It'll give them a heart attack. So also, if you use electric fencing around, like at nose level around an existing fence, they really have to be, you need to be sure they understand the role of that fence. Because you can kill them. They could get their foot wrapped up in it by, jumping over it. It'll kill them.
Yeah, a lot of times when we're training animals to electric fence, we'll tie like a little flag on it so that they go up and sniff the flag and they touch it with their nose so that they learn that shocks and then they just stay away from it.
Yeah. Kindergarten.
Yes.
Everybody needs kindergarten. We also use kindergarten to teach, there are 3 ways that we call goats. So, because I see all these people say, how do you chase your goat? It's like, no, you don't understand. The goat comes to you. So they would start learning their name from day 1. So if I have, my herd is out in the pasture and it's time to milk, they'll usually come in because they know they're going to get something, like creme brulee for their meal. But if they don't, they're really happy. It's cool and this, shady and everything. So I will call. So I'll yell, Trisha. And she will answer me. She will acknowledge that she heard me. She may not come that very minute, but she has a call that says, I heard you. And then she'll come. I know she's going to come. But if they're too far away for me to just keep, call Trisha or call Grace or whatever, then I can yell, yoo-hoo, and that carries a really long way. And they learn, the young ones learn because the big ones are going to respond. So as soon as they come the first few times, then the young ones understand too. And then if they're too far away, like down in the holler or over in the far away pasture, I have the cowbell and I ring the cowbell and they can hear that for a really, really long way. And it may take them a while, but they will come to that. And it's super important to have these systems in place because you can't always go after them. Let's say there's a big snowstorm and they're stranded. You need to know where they are. Occasionally, I've also had a goat that had a bell. If she was always at the end of the line coming, I might give her a bell and call it bling, give her some bling. But the last time I did this, they all attacked. They're like, we want the bling. So I kind of stopped doing that. But it is an option. But since Pinky decided she should have had the bling, and then when I took the bling off of the other one, Pinky kept attacking. I'm like, wait, she doesn't have it anymore. I got it. So I didn't do that anymore. But I think it would work, especially with a small herd, to have that bell on that goat that comes last. So these are all little tools, but they really are powerful in helping you have some control. And they love the fact that they're coming, and it's very beautiful to see them run down the hill and up the other hill and come to me and calling, I'm coming.
Right.
Because they will yell that, so they're pretty smart.
So what's proper goat nutrition? How can I optimally feed my goat to make sure that they are ready to make milk when I ask them to, or meat when I ask them to? And then get rebred to have more babies when I need them to?
Well, I think there's lots of dispute. So you can ask a company like Nutrina or Cargill, or they own Nutrina, but any of those kind of more commercial feeds, and you can ask them and they'll have a different answer each time. One of the things that's interesting is to read how milk really is processed in the body of an animal that produces milk, like a goat or a cow, and feeding those extruded foods from really fake food, which a lot of us, like me, I don't have access to even non-GMO food feed that's easy to, you know, I have to drive an hour each way to get the feed, and you can't just stop. So let's say I ran out of feed and there's a snowstorm and I can't get to the feed. That's my biggest challenge. Then I can't just give them any feed.
Right.
So I have to get the feed I can the most consistently. So what I do and what I recommend is if you can get non-GMO feed, or which is going to have real grains in it,
Right.
and you also have good healthy pasture that isn't in a deficit position around copper and selenium and stuff, then they can do really well with that mixture of different grains. And I'm not talking about little pellet extruded food. I'm talking about wheat and oats and beet pulp and things like that. So you can go online and look up a number of different recipes just based on what's available in your area, because every area of the country, or even in other countries, has different really good grain mixtures that you can mix yourself or buy. And especially like with organic, I think somebody who's raising naturally, or at least is non-GMO, that's almost as good as organic, because a lot of the organic in this country is not even from this country. So how organic, I don't know, is it? Anyway, so what you want to have is some kind of balance. And the problem with feeding the pelleted food is the milk that's produced is far inferior.
Really?
It is measurably inferior. There are studies, I was just reading over the weekend, several studies that have been done that show that the pelleted food produces a lot less of the things that we need in the milk for it to be healthy for the human body. So we really owe it to ourselves, not just our goats that we want to keep healthy, and also it's just producing an inferior product and costing a lot to do it.
Right.
So we want to have a balance of the nutrients that a goat needs, and that comes through the food we give, the water, the minerals, the vitamins, and then also if they're foraging or just browsing, which is mainly eating grass. If they're in a natural situation where they're able to eat a lot of blackberry, raspberry, vines, honeysuckle, those kind of things, they're going to have their mineral balance right there. They don't have to have it necessarily in some kind of like feeding kelp or something to produce that. That's what I have to do, is feed kelp and a number of other things to produce that for the animal. So again, it's up to the individual farmer and what they have accessible to them, but there's a lot of stuff online, and really they owe it to themselves to educate themselves on that. They need to be fed a wholesome diet. So lots of people they go to the bread thrift store and they buy those big carts of bread and they feed bread. And I remember this guy saying to me one time, well, you know, goats are just waiting to die. And I said, they are? Oh, wow, that's terrible. Why do you think that? And he said, because mine just die all the time. I said, well, what are you feeding them? And he said, well, I get bread at the bakery. I said, that's what you feed? He said, yeah, they love it. I said, okay, well, I love ice cream too, but, you know, am I eating it every meal? I'm not eating it at all right now. So, I mean, anyway, we have to think about, if we want that animal to go the distance, what kind of fuel are we putting into that body? So the machine of that body is going to work properly, because food is medicine, whether we like to believe that or not. It really is the truth. So we also need them to have voluntary access to pastures and exercise areas outdoors, meaning they can go and come as they need to, at least a certain part of the day. So I see people say they tie their goats out. This is inhumane. I will not back down off of that position at any turn. I have left my goats tied up for 1 minute to go because the other goat was screaming. And this one goat, she manages somehow in this one place, if she's ever tied up there, to strangle herself. No other goat does this, and I have twice now saved her just before she was ready to croak. So you're going to put that goat on a hillside. I have been up in Amish country and stopped more than once in nice clothes because a goat was hanging itself on the hillside, and got out and fought the goat to save its life, and then gone and banged on the door because I was really upset and Fortunately, nobody came to the door. So
No, I
Anyway.
see a crazy lady at the door.
that's right. So anyway, so stored feeds, again, we want to make sure that feed is in a place where no rodents and no bugs can really get into it. Sometimes the feed's going to have those pantry pest moths. Okay, we can't escape from that. That's just life, and they have protein and it's not going to hurt them. But I don't want cockroaches. I don't want mice. They're not going to eat the food if it gets poop in it.
Right.
So, and we also don't want it to get mold. Mold will kill a goat. So you see mold in hay, you see mold in feed. And also we need to know, back up in the balancing, we need to know if we're buying hay from somebody, what is the content of that hay? What is what's called the TDN, which is the protein in that hay? Dairy goats need 17% minimum. So most hay is not going to look like that.
No.
And then kids should not be weaned before 6 weeks of age. A lot of people try to get around that by bottle feeding. My question is to say, how does that mama who has raised this, who has produced this kid, how is this impacting her initially? And a lot of people, they won't care. But then how does this impact the kid who is not allowed to suckle? It takes a whole different set of muscles and behavior to have a nipple from a bottle, a commercial bottle, versus nursing where they're having contact with that teat and the udder, where you're sure it's all completely clean because it's coming out of what you call that, sterile environment inside the udder. So, you know, I asked myself, well, how much do you really care about this process and the animal and how well it's going to do over its life if you're going to just take it right away, put it on a bottle, and sell it to somebody?
Right.
And a lot of times they do that with these small breeds like the Nigerians because they're very cute and they can sell them. They pre-sell them before they're even born. And they're treated like, you know, a little puppy in a sack or something. And that's just totally inhumane. People can argue with me about it all they want, but it's not the way the animal was intended to live.
So what things should a good herd manager know about and plan for?
Well, this is quite a long list, and I'm just going to go through it really quickly because it's super important. And maybe at some point we could do something where we do Ask the Expert or Ask Me Anything webinar sometime. But first of all, kidding. If you're going to have goats that are going to be pregnant, it's super important to understand the role of colostrum and how to make sure that that kid is getting the colostrum and how to avoid the problems of mismothering. So occasionally you'll have a doe that is just the mother from hell, and you'll have to be prepared for that. And we can talk about that. We could do a whole another webinar on just the kidding season. So understand about injections and how to give injections. Goats are very specific. They can really get terrible problems, abscesses and things from injection sites, and that's maybe other animals have that problem, but they seem to have it a lot. And so I don't really like to give injections, but to be prepared. Also understand oral dosing and how that rumen, that first rumen works. And depending on the medicine or the chemical or the minerals that you're giving, where does that need to be in the mouth and the throat? Because it's different for different things.
Okay.
So some things just get in the front of the mouth, it doesn't matter, but there are quite a number of things like parasite chemicals that you want that animal not to have any feed in its gut, and you want that to get past that first rumen, so you're going to use a drenching gun that has a long stem on it to get it deep down in the throat so it gets down into that first stomach, which is where the parasite move is. So it's important to understand that. Dehorning, that's a whole conversation of, you know, if you're going to show goats or register your goats with the American Dairy Goat Association, they have to be disbudded or dehorned. This is a really cruel process where they burn them, all of the horn knobs, all the way to the skull, and a goat can die from this. The whole argument is that it makes it a safer animal with the humans. The other thing to consider on the flip side of that is that horns play a very important role in the health of the goat and also how they heat and cool themselves, and how they're able to maintain that body temperature at different ranges. of temperature. They have lots of minerals and hormones in them. So if you want a goat that's going to live a long, healthy life and have a chance at that, horns are a good place to start. You can always buy tennis balls to put on the ends of the horns if you're thinking that goat's gonna, do something you don't want it to do. I have been banged a couple of times. It was my own fault, but I have a guinea. She's my one that has an attitude. She has put her head up and hit me right in the mouth with her horns, but not hard, because that's the other thing to consider is they learn how to use those horns with each other and with humans once they have them. And if you have a goat that doesn't seem to understand that, you need to get rid of her. But you'll see, they understand the horns. So the ones that don't have horns and the ones that do, when they're not really fighting, but they're arguing, they'll put their head in a totally different position. So their head fits in between the horns, and the goat with the horns will allow it. So they really do understand how to use them. Castration, super important thing to understand. We do banding, so we think that's the best way to go, because we band at night when they're really young. It's a tool that you have, and it puts a really strong rubber band up against the body to cut off the blood flow to the testicles. And over time, it will fall off. You just have to, watch, make sure. I've never had an animal get an infection. You do it at night, so if they cry, which is rare, you don't hear it. And then by the next day, nothing happened. Shearing, so for some goats, like Angoras, understanding what you're going to do with that, or also during kidding season, you're going to trim the hair around the tail to create a situation where there isn't so much collection of blood and mucus and stuff coming out of the birthing process. Milking procedures, if you're going to have milk goats, you need to really take a class somewhere and understand about how to handle the milk and what to do with the goats while they're in a lactating mode of their life. How to dry them up, how to get them to get more milk, how to avoid mastitis, all those things are important. Hoof trimming and maintenance. I can't say enough about this one either, because the health of the goat is impacted tremendously by not taking care of the hoofs. So a lot of goats that I've seen, they'll have their hoofs like this, and then the hoof will have grown under like a fingernail like that, and then that all collects up a lot of mud and stones. Sometimes that you'll hobble a goat and cripple it for life because the stone collects up in there. So I try to have a schedule with having 13 goats so that I'm pretty good. The boys, the 2 bucks I have that are in the other field, they really get the worst end of it because they don't always get their hooves trimmed. But we have these big sandstones that everybody can jump on, and that does help a little bit. It keeps the kids' hooves in good shape. And we start trimming hooves with the kids pretty soon, even if we're not really trimming. We wanted to learn how to get on the milk stand and stand there like good little kids and understand that they have to do what we ask them to do. So we use hoof trimming as a way to teach that. And then euthanasia. This is one that nobody wants to think about. But sometimes it just really is the way it is. And this is a really amazing moment in the goat herder's life and how they deal with this. Whether they have the ability to have the courage to do what's right and not allow the animal to suffer. That's only going to happen if you have a plan.
Right.
And then the other part of that is, where's that carcass going? So one of the things that we do is we have a big muck pile from deep bedding in the winter, or because we moved out everything out of the stalls. And so we bury in the muck pile so that we're not digging a big hole in the ground. The decomposing goes rather quickly, and we feel it's really honoring of the animal, but it also puts a lot of amazing microbes into that compost, and it gives us a very black compost. In fact, we can tell where an animal's been buried, like, not that we don't know that, but because the compost that's really rich will be a very dark brown, the compost from the dead carcass will be black.
Wow.
It's just the microbes. And that's what we're looking for in any healthy soil, is a lot of those really great microbes. It helps with parasite control. Microbes destroy some kinds of parasites and definitely eggs. And so that's what we're going with. And euthanasia, some of the most powerful things that have happened in my life have happened with animals waiting for me, and I show up and they have waited for me so they can die. To have those moments in life, to understand that there's a real connection to all of us is powerful. Being able to recognize the signs of normal and abnormal behavior and pain and fear is super important. Otherwise, a goat, any kind of livestock or any kind of animal it's not able to say, hey, I got a headache today. You can tell me I've got a headache today and it's getting worse. So by the time this animal is presenting things that you understand, like standing in the corner and not looking or off feed, they are so far into what's wrong, you may not be able to do anything about it. But if you know this animal and you keep good records and you have a notebook and you write things down about her specifics or his specific behaviors and his normal body temperature and his normal rumen rate, that's going to help you to understand if something's potentially wrong, so you act early and don't wait. Recognize the signs of common diseases and understanding how you're going to deal with that and when to seek help from the vet. One of the challenges that lots of us in this country have in rural areas is that the vet is really for small animals. And the other challenge is most vets don't study about goats. So we don't have, no, and we have no, the goats are at the bottom because they really don't study. They do study some pigs in vet school, I will say, not enough, but they do. But they know cattle and they know a little bit about chickens and a tiny bit about sheep and almost nothing about goats. And this is really hard because here we are. We got a problem and he's telling us to do one thing or she's telling us to do one thing. And we're going, wait a minute, that's not even for a goat. So that's a challenge. Basics about nutrition, about body condition scoring. There's a whole thing online about body condition scoring so you can see maybe sometimes the way your goat looks in terms of their bone structure will help you to understand there's something going on, but there's no presenting problem. Understanding their anatomy, and knowledge of kidding and the care of newborns. Okay. So we could talk all day about minerals, and this will be on the list, and you can look up all of these things to see if I'm just making this up or not, but this is the basic mineral makeup that every goat has to have and have a balance of in order to stay healthy. And if one is off, particularly copper, they will lose their hair, they will eventually die, they will have what they call fishtails, so their tail will begin to look like that instead of like that. So you can look at a herd and you can see everybody who has copper deficiency. So there are a lot of different things that can go on. Selenium, the next slide has selenium in it. No, it doesn't, but we'll talk about selenium. Selenium is in a deficiency in all of North America, and when selenium is deficient, the animal will miscarry, have trouble getting pregnant, won't lose the placenta at the end, which is not a good thing either. So lots of little things with the minerals that make huge changes for the goat's health. So why should I certify my business? So let me just say really quickly before we run out of time that it's something to consider, because if we don't have guidelines, how can we be good business people? We may have a good gut feeling, but we also have to comply with the rest of the world. And I think there's a lot of information out there, and if you'll keep going to the next slide, there's a lot of information out there about what customers are looking for if you want to sell your products, your goat products in particular. And they want to know how it's been treated, where the milk's been, is it local, is it really local, or is it just saying it's local? So these websites that we have listed here with animal welfare approved and humane farm animal control care, they have webinars from time to time. They have a lot of really good, easy to understand information with manuals that list all the things that you ought to be doing. So you could at least initially look at what they have and say, all right, I'm doing really well in this area, I need to improve. Here, I don't care about this section. Whatever that is, you pick and choose. And then if you wanted to be certified or like animal welfare approved, this could help you to get more money for your product or more money for when you want to sell kids or dairy goats or whatever you're selling as a product. Because customers, a wide range of people, but definitely 3/4 of people are interested in that as an issue. Again, just more information out there. And then I guess what I want to do is, since we're out of time, is to just close with, are we still online?
Yep.
Okay, good. Is to say that if you're interested, a lot of the information that we talked about today are, there are 2 different posters that have been produced as part of this series that we're doing with the SARE grant and Rural Action and ACEnet. And they're for especially dairy farming resources for in the barn. It's a coded poster. And one is all about these measurements and all kinds of things about minerals and stuff. And the other one is about emergency care and different places to go if you have an emergency. So if you're interested in the poster, you can contact rural, R-U-R-A-L, hard word to say, ruralaction.org, and they will be happy to send you a PDF file of the poster. And I think you'll find it to be really, really helpful.
Okay,
Anything else to say? Goodbye, adios, hasta la vista.
that's all the time we have today. So we'll see you on the next webinar.
Okay, thanks.